Welcome to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast, brought to you by Stratum. I'm your host, Griffin Hamilton. This is the show where I interview industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights into modern-day facilities management. From hospitality to commercial real estate and everything in between, we'll learn what it really takes to succeed as a facilities manager.
Welcome to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast. Today, I've got Will with Infogrid, and Will, it's been a long time in the making for us to finally get together, but nice to have you on finally.
Yeah, likewise. It certainly has, but will be all the sweeter, I'm sure, for that wait. And really excited to be here today. So thanks so much for inviting me on.
Yeah, of course. Well, before we jump into the details here, why don't you tell the audience who you are? Obviously, I'm sure that they picked up on the accent here, where you're from, and what you guys do over at Infogrid.
Awesome. Yeah, so sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Will. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Infogrid. I'll go a little bit more into us in a minute, but in a nutshell, we are a B2B software as a service platform aimed at facilities managers and operators of large amounts of real estate, where we use a combination of microsensors and AI at the cloud to capture data where it doesn't currently exist and use it to solve real-world problems, particularly around the estates, premises, and facilities management space. Personally, I've had a little bit of an eclectic background. So as Griffin alluded to there, I'm British originally and now split my time fairly equally between the US and the UK. A lot of time on the east coast of the US, so still can't avoid those short evenings. Unfortunately, it's like 4:45 sunset now, so it's a bit depressing. Look, I've had quite an eclectic background in the lead up to founding and running Infogrid. We're about 3.5 years old as a company now. Before that, I spent 5 years in the British Army. I was a tank commander. I spent 6 months as a cage fighter in Thailand. I spent a couple of years in financial services, and then immediately before starting Infogrid, I was working in commercial due diligence. So going into companies and looking for problems broadly, and one of the problems that we spotted is what Infogrid now solves.
Now, I'm going to stop you there really quickly. I don't know if I heard this correctly, but did you say cage fighter?
Yeah, I did.
So you're going to have to elaborate there.
So it's not quite as irrational as it seems, although I never managed to convince my mother of this. So I was looking at joining the military at the time, right? So straight out of college, I followed quite a lot of. I was at a university called Oxford, and a lot of my compatriots went on to pretty much one of three careers: law, finance, or consultancy. So I kind of followed that treadmill and ended up in finance, but realized it probably wasn't my long term. For a number of reasons, but you've probably guessed already, I'm quite a sort of outgoing, gregarious person. And I tracked it one day. I spoke 48 words to another human being all day, right? And I was like, this is not going to work for me. So I started thinking, okay, where can I get some of the skills that I want to develop in life? I was in my mid-20s at this point. Where can I get some of the skills I want in life around sort of leadership, sort of practical teamwork, variety, intellectual stimulation, and frankly a bit of adventure, but this also be a meaningful and constructive career. And I settled on the armed forces and particularly the army. But the thing is, I'd never done anything like that before, apart from sort of rugby training. That was about the most physical environment I'd ever been in, right? So very physical and very disciplined as you go through Sandhurst, which is our officer academy. So I was like, well, I better validate that, I like this and that I can actually handle that kind of thing. I thought, well, where can you do this? Because when you sign up to the army, it's a minimum 4 years. Like when you're in, you're in. It's not like you put in your 1 month notice and you're out. Like you're in for 4 years. Yeah. So I was like, better check before. Where can I do that? And the best idea I could come up with was there are these mixed martial arts training camps in Thailand that people go to train to enter mixed martial arts, and you get a lot of the UFC fighters out there and so forth. And the one I went to is called Tiger Muay Thai and Mixed Martial Arts in Phuket. They have quite a few cycle through there. I think it's a lot bigger and more commercial undertaking now than it was 12 years ago. But so went out there initially for a month, and I loved it so much I ended up staying 6. But originally only to train and experience that kind of discipline. And it really was a case of, look, you do press ups, or I'm going to hit you with a stick and then show you the stick. I do the press ups. And so, mercifully, the army is no longer like that. But I loved it because there was just a real kind of clarity and purity to the life. So I ended up staying for 6 months. And anyone who's sort of a sports player here, if you're on a soccer team or a football team or whatever, if you only ever do the training sessions and you never actually get to play the matches, that's quite a frustrating feeling, right? And it was very much the same for me. I was doing a lot of training. I thought, well, I really want to get in the ring and give this a go. And I wouldn't say I had an illustrious career. I had got choked out in the first round of my first fight. I was poked unconscious. That was fun. But I guess it was like one of those David and Goliath stories where I was like David, but Goliath really won, right? I was like, I got this. This guy was 2 weight classes heavier than me, been training about a year longer, but I was like, don't worry, I'm smarter. I'll get him. Turns out, didn't play out like that. And then the second one, I won on points, which is an unusual thing for cage fighting. But yeah, so anyone who knows Tiger, Muay Thai, and MMA, they know this thing called barbecue beatdown. So it's like every month they have like a big barbecue and then a load of fights, and you can go and kind of get amateur exposure to that. So did those, and yeah. Mild aneurysm for most of my family and loved ones, but mercifully none for me. So yeah, I loved it, and then came back, redoubled in my interest to join the army. Went and had 5 years as a tank commander, deployed all over the world, and then left at the end of 2016, and rest is history.
I can assure you I was not expecting this conversation to go in that direction, but I'm sitting here cracking up. Just I could imagine all the training in the first round. You get choked out that quickly, and it's like, what the heck am I doing?
Yeah.
But hey, you're
it was
standing.
Not the game plan. Let's put it that way.
And the fact that you had the mentality of, I'll outsmart him. That's a good in theory strategy there, but. Clearly didn't work out too well.
It's a good metaphor, right? Like at least I got in the ring, but preferably you'd at least survive a little longer in the ring. Right? So yeah.
Hey, but you know what? You're standing. You could at least talk, and you didn't get choked out, where you don't have a voice anymore, and we're here. So I guess that's the important thing, right?
all those blessings. So yeah. Phenomenal experiences. Really glad I did them, and really glad to kind of have that. In the rearview mirror, shall we say?
Yeah, I hope it's not in the present.
Yeah, get back in there right now, but there we go.
All right, so fast forward some handful of years, you're out of the military, and now you're kind of exploring what you're going to be doing next. So what led you to starting Infogrid?
Yeah, so it was really to do with a problem, right? And I think this is how most companies should start. And it's a bit of an issue in the tech world, is that many start from a technology and go looking for a problem rather than build a solution to a known problem. And so, as I mentioned, after I left the army, I went into something called commercial due diligence for private equity deals. So what that means is, like if a company is looking to invest in or buy another company, they're going to go through their financials and a bunch of stuff digitally. But they also need to physically assess whether or not that business is as it says it is on paper. So I would do some stuff at a desk in terms of market and competition and so forth, but I'd also be physically visiting a lot of different businesses on a weekly basis and looking for problems. I was looking for issues with health and safety, compliance, operational efficiency, those kind of things. And one of the things that just came across loud and clear to me very quickly was just how bad most companies were at the capture and use of, frankly, any, but especially real-time data from their real estate. And that always astounded me because, it was like 2017 that I was doing this. And so by that time, we were living in an era of hyper-powerful cloud computing. We had miniaturized devices, and we had omnipresent cellular connectivity through 2, 3G, 4G, and now 5G as well. So it felt to me that all the components to be able to capture and use this data in real time were there. But yet, you look around, and most companies, the competition was a clipboard from the 50s. And so there was this real inertia. And so for me, the question was why? Why are you not using this kind of technology to solve these sorts of problems? And the answer that came back was just remarkably consistent. They said, well, look, it's either too complicated, too expensive, or usually it's both of those things. And so that was kind of really dampening the impetus to go and do things. It's kind of like, well, we've always done it this way. It kind of works. Why change it? And I just thought that was crazy, given the tools that were available. So set about trying to solve that problem, and that's kind of the kernel of the idea that became Infogrid. And for any budding entrepreneurs who are sort of thinking of taking a step out and doing something themselves here, I got a little bit of a story from this, right? I had this idea, and at the time I was consulting to do this due diligence. It was a very lucrative day rate. Any day I didn't work, I was losing out on hundreds of dollars in pay. And I had this idea, and I'd lined up a cold meeting with somebody I thought could be a client. And this was a head of estates for a healthcare organization. They managed about 110 healthcare facilities. And the reason I set that meeting up is I'd read this book. It's called The Mum Test. And it basically says if you've got a business idea, don't ask your mum or your friends if it's a good idea, because they're going to tell you yes, because they care about you and they want you to feel happy. What you should do is go and ask somebody who you think will be your client if they'll pay for it, because that's a good indication that this is a good business idea. So I took that quite literally, and I went and got the first cold meeting I could with somebody who managed a large kind of estate. And I really nearly did not go to that meeting because it was about a 2.5 hour drive there and a 2.5 hour drive back. At the time, I had a pretty beat up old car that I didn't even know if it would make it. And of course, I was giving up this day's work to go. So I really nearly didn't go. And of course, this turned out to be our first paying client and the launch pad for the entire business. Like then and there in the room, having just described the idea, I got a pre-commitment to launch the product if we built it and a paid pilot of it. But I nearly didn't go. So I guess, like, you know when you're on vacation and you think, I'll come back and take a photo of that beautiful view later. You just never do, right? So just like seize that moment. That's what I'd say. But anyway, so that was kind of the background of how we really got going. And I think I was struck at the time by a statistic from JLL, which is 330/300, which states for any given corporate real estate, on average, there'll be about a $3 per square foot per year spend on energy, $30 per square foot per year spend on sort of rent and maintenance of the space itself, but $300 per square foot per year spend on people. Right, so it's that labour that's really a very significant cost, and with that comes all sorts of other things, particularly big environmental impact. And this is something very close to my heart, is the fact that buildings account for 39% of global emissions, and we also spend 90% of our time in them as humans, right? So if you make them sustainable and healthy, then you're making the planet much more sustainable and healthy, and that starts with how people operate. And so I looked at this and I thought, okay, this is a really large problem, right? People have been piling into pure play energy efficiency for buildings for quite a long time. By 2017, there's probably been 2 decades of people looking at building management system automation and so forth. But it seemed to me that working with the kind of real people on the ground to help them with their daily tasks and make them more efficient, get them back to the far more important jobs and fewer manual checks, that was where there was a real benefit to be gained very quickly. And so that's what we did. We started working with facilities managers to understand what their problems were and how we could solve for them. And rather than sort of deciding what the problem was and then trying to enforce that on somebody on the ground. And so this meant that we applied our approach of kind of very simple, very low cost IoT, plus leveraging that power of cloud to add artificial intelligence to it, so that we could solve these problems in a way that really was scalable and low cost enough. So if you go back to those original problems, too expensive, too complicated equals not scalable. So to give you a really simple example, right? You might have a micro sensor that looks a bit like, I'm going to get one out of my wallet. I've always got one to have that looks a bit like this, right? So that's a basic, simple sensor. But it'll last for 15 years. It's wireless. It's battery powered. For those that are listening in rather than watching the video, it looks a little bit like a Scrabble piece. It's about 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters by 2 millimeters. And it measures temperature. So off of the top of that, you will typically get Fahrenheit readings. And that's it. So if you want to monitor a fridge, something like that, then you don't need anything else. But to make this into something that's maybe useful to an FM, this is where that cloud component comes in. So if I go and mount that same sensor like this, on the outside of a pipe, for those who are listening rather than watching in, I've got a little mock-up of a pipe here and there's a sensor zip tied to the outside of it, in between the insulation. That's going to take me about 3 seconds. When I click a couple of buttons, I can now say this is on a hot tap or a cold tap or a hot water supply, and what type of pipe is it. That sensor can now tell me whether or not water is flowing and at what temperature, without having to go into the pipe. Well, why do I want to know that? Because for something like Legionnaire's disease that thrives in stagnant and tepid water, I'm physically checking that at the moment. I'm going around and I'm running all of those taps. On a monthly basis in a healthcare environment, it might be weekly or even daily, right? I'm sending a human to go and do that, and they are probing that temperature. So that's vastly wasteful of typically a very qualified engineer's time. But it's also environmentally wasteful because they probably drove to those remote sites, especially just to do that task. So that's emissions from the tailpipe. And then there's probably natural gas heating that water, which is flowing straight down the drain. So we recently did a deployment, for example, with a leading bank to 564 different branches. And it saves about $3 million of labor a year, right? Which they can now reallocate to actual meaningful engineering tasks, creating real value for that client. Fantastic. But on top of that, it saves about 8.5 million litres of wasted water and 800 tonnes of carbon a year, right? So it's all about managing that balance of, okay, I bring this in for a very particular purpose to solve a particular problem, but off the back of it, I'm going to get these second and third order effects that will help the environment, help the health of our people, and so forth. So that's been our approach from the beginning, is start with those building blocks. We're selling to business, so ultimately it's got to make financial sense. I completely understand that. But then you create building blocks that unlock all sorts of additional functionality and use cases that wouldn't have been possible if you just went in straight at the beginning.
That's incredible, and just like the impact beyond, as you just alluded to, the financial impact, and just like from an environmental standpoint, you're measuring that, right? How much of a difference that could make, and if you extrapolate that across, every building that you have in your portfolio, and then looking big picture across the world, that's a huge impact that's just waiting to be had.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly, and it doesn't stop here. So I guess. So from an Infogrid perspective, we've come at this with a dual-pronged approach, both soft and hard FM. Right? So with use cases end-to-end or integratable with CAFM systems or third-party systems, full ecosystem play. For everything from smart cleaning to air quality and virus risk to employee or customer satisfaction, through to those hard maintenance tasks. So that is things like Legionnaire's disease, but also emergency lighting, damp and mold prevention, leak detection, etc. Energy monitoring, gas and water utility monitoring, those kind of things. Well, all of those together, each and every single one of the use cases has a reason to be there, and it's modular. So let's say, think of it like a Swiss Army knife. Right now, I just want to use the knife, right? Like I just want Legionnaire's disease. But later on, maybe I want to add electricity monitoring and smart cleaning. So that's the bottle opener and the corkscrew. I can add or subtract as many use cases as I want, but the more I have, the more data I have that I can then combine to answer even more complex problems. So 1 + 1 often equals 3 or greater than 3 in these kind of scenarios. So yes, it's great to know my risk of Legionnaires, but it's even better to know that alongside how many people were in the building, how much the restrooms were used, what the cleaning schedule was, what the outdoor conditions were. And this is how we start to build up into a picture of whether the overall building is healthy. And that's something for which there is no physical sensor and can be no physical sensor. But once we understand whether the building's healthy or not and why, you can start to make AI-driven recommendations that say, well, look, it's not healthy right now, and it's because of this. But if you do X, Y, and Z, then you can be 20% healthier in 2 months and 50% healthier in 6 months. So it's that kind of starting from base principles, because it's a lot simpler that way to kind of manage expectations and change management, and then building up to that overall big impact.
Is there, when you refer to a healthy building, is there a standard of what is considered a healthy building, and how is that measured?
So there are a lot of standards, and I think this is one of the problems a little bit in the industry, is there's sort of no completely agreed upon global metric. You've got some emerging that do a relatively good job, things like fit well, reset well, and so forth, often with a big kind of emphasis on air quality, which is certainly a very good and easy place to start in terms of improving health. And then you've got some great academic studies, right? So coming out of places like Harvard that look at a multitude of factors, and it's a combination of stuff that we see in kind of well-known certifications and stuff that we see coming out of cutting-edge academic research that we try and build into what we're doing. And I think the key point is it needs to be a living entity, right? If you just say, okay, healthy building is this, and then you just stop, and then that stays the same for 20 years, well, that's not going to evolve as science evolves, right? And if you look back 20 years, we were not aware of the negative impact of many of the things that we do today. If you look back 100 years, and it sounds astounding, but you could easily conceive of some of these standards still existing from the sort of 50s or whatever, kind of approaching that kind of level. There's so much that we now understand about human physiology, about attention span, about mental health that we didn't at the time that those might have been designed. So it needs to be constantly evolving and living. And this is where keeping something dynamic and having it fueled by AI, neural networks, as we do, really helps. So we're looking at that academic study, those academic studies, and the various different certifications and pulling that together. And that means a lot of different facets, right? So it can be air quality, it can be water hygiene, it can be population density and social distancing, i.e. how many people are in my building and where are they congregating, light levels, noise levels. All of these kind of things are meaningful contributors to it. And you may or may not, as a building operator or owner, have access to all of those data points or, the budget or will to put them in. But you can start with parts of it. And even that gives you an indication and an ongoing indication that can be benchmarked against other buildings, both within your own portfolio and externally, so that you can start to learn and improve. And then slowly you add additional building blocks to what you're doing to make that building healthy. And of course, the main thing is, what's the so what? Like, okay, now I know that my building is or isn't healthy, and why. What do I do about it? And that's where proactive driven recommendations, again, fueled by artificial intelligence, can come in. And that's where you learn from the whole. So we're deployed in thousands and thousands of buildings, right? So we're learning what healthy looks like in lots of buildings, and from that can make recommendations for the benefit of all about how to improve and how to avoid pitfalls.
Got it. Yeah, and that certainly makes sense. And that's kind of the direction that facilities is going, right? As we're implementing more and more and different types of technology and gathering more data, we could go from reactive to preventive to predictive to prescriptive maintenance strategies where you're getting ahead of it from a maintenance perspective, but also from the health level of an actual building.
Yeah, and the key point here is it's not incompatible with good business. Right, so let's give a simple example: smart cleaning, which we do really broadly. At its base level, this is understanding what within a building has been used, and then cleaning that appropriate to usage. Right. So, historic model for say cleaning restrooms is I'm going to send somebody every 4 hours or 6 hours or whatever it may be, and sometimes that restroom needed cleaning long before the cleaner arrived, and sometimes it doesn't need cleaning at all. So you move that simply to a reactive model where you say, okay, look, I know that I start to run out of paper towels or soap, or I start to get complaints about the cleanliness of this restroom at around 60 uses. Then I can set them an alert that say, when I hit 50 uses, I want my cleaner to be notified so they can make their way and clean it before the problem arises. Or if I'm doing night cleaning of a facility, right now is a great example. During this COVID era, we're seeing occupancy rates at 20-30%. So it's crazy to clean every desk every night when not all of them are used. So if I understand what's been used and I give a guided floor plate to a cleaner, they can go and clean what needs to be done in terms of the desk and then reallocate that time to something far more important, right? Like a deep clean that makes everyone safer. And so you're gathering all of that data that helps you to make smarter decisions in the future, but you're also generating an immediate business and health benefit. And I think this is the final point to kind of add to this is, you start from individual use cases. They build up to things like healthy buildings. You can view a healthy buildings as a part of the S of ESG, right? A really important social mechanism for ensuring wellness. And that feeds up to the broader ESG agenda. And that's something really close to our heart, right? Buildings account for 39% of global emissions, and we spend 90% of our time in them. And so through these small changes that are not to anyone's detriment, you can actually create a lot of environmental and social benefits and then feed into governance from that, which is increasingly, again, good business. You're seeing significantly improved yields and significantly improved customer retention in facilities that take that seriously. And certainly from all of our FM clients across the globe, the move towards ESG as a part of their service offering is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and going back to something you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, one of the problems that you saw was the clipboard, right? Going
Mm-hmm.
from something very manual into using technology, and that's something as an industry. We're seeing that more and more frequently, where people are starting to integrate technology into their day-to-day lives. And we understand that they're across the globe, over 50% of FMs are going to be retiring over the next 5 to 7 years. And so technology needs to be there, and it is going to be a huge part of where we're moving forward as an industry. So specifically to IoT, if I'm a facilities manager that hasn't yet dabbled in that space or utilized those technologies, what is step one where I can begin this process to get a healthier building, get a smarter building using this type of technology?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so pick your cliche here, right? Every 1,000-mile journey starts with a big single step, or every castle's built with the first brick, or something along those lines. So I think the concept of digitizing a service you've been doing in a certain way for decades potentially could be really overwhelming. So the key is whatever you pick to use as your technology provider, pick something that is modular and future-proof and plays into an ecosystem. Because a building is a living ecosystem, right? You will probably already have something like a CAFM system, a computer-aided facility management system. You might have a BMS. You probably have multiple stakeholders. Maybe you have the owner of the building plus the operator, maybe a company, and the FM all in one place, and they all have their different requirements around data flow and so forth. And likelihood is there will be established processes or technical systems already there that work and people know and are happy with. So what you don't want is to be ripping and replacing everything and really having to deal with a large amount of change management. Rather, you want technology that's augmentative to that. So if you start bringing in sensor technology that can feed you real-time data, you want to have an understanding of the problem you want to solve. And I'd suggest taking on one or two. So say, okay, look, I really do know that I'm cleaning inefficiently and I could do that a lot better. Why don't I start with that? Once I've got my head around that, I can build on that to the next use case. Or, hey, we got a real problem with leaks. Let's just start with automatically detecting leaks today. Or anything like that. And then you build up with a company where you know that there's legs to go to many more use cases. One of the friction points in the expansion technology in space is where you've got 10 different vendors to do 10 different tasks. Then I'm learning 10 systems, I'm trying to build 10 integrations, 10 security reviews, all that kind of stuff. Much better if you can, even if you only would want to do one thing right now, pick a system that you can then build upon, right? So go back to that Swiss Army knife methodology, right? I have the knife to start with, but later I want to be able to take out my corkscrew, my saw, my bottle opener, whatever it may be, without buying a new knife. And then what I want is that tool to be integratable with everything that I've already got, right? So does this go and integrate with a system like a Corrigo or a BMS system like Iconics? Does this play nice with third-party tools? Maybe I'm dabbling with a tenant engagement app. And so alongside knowing which desks to clean, I'd also like to tell my tenants which desks are open so they can go and sit somewhere that with confidence, right? So I can use the same data and the same sensors for multiple things. So I would suggest picking one or two problems that are particular pain points for you, and all the better if they have a significant cost associated to them as well, and then taking them on and then building on that to go forward, rather than trying to boil the ocean all at once.
Yep, love it. Well, Will, I certainly appreciate it. And this has been a phenomenal conversation, and love diving into the technology space. And that's where I get really excited about the direction of facilities management, is the change of technology and the implementation and usage of technology as we continue to move forward. But before I let you get out of here, I've got one question I ask everybody, and that is, who or what has had the biggest impact on you and your career?
This is a really cheesy answer, and I think down the road I'm going to cringe as I listen back on this, but it's actually true, right? So when I was in the army, I used to be known as Captain Sunscreen. I was ranked captain, and I just obsessively wore sunscreen because I wanted to keep obviously useful and radiant. That hasn't worked so well. If you want to do that, sunscreen's the first thing. The other tip is don't found a startup. The reason that I got that in my head was from a song, right? It's a song by Baz Luhrmann. It's a speech that he gave to a graduating class in '99. And the song's called Everybody's Free to Wear Sunscreen. And it starts by saying, wear sunscreen, it's really important, it's proven by scientists. And then what he does is he goes on to list a whole load of life advice that he's kind of gathered from his own experience and other sort of famous and influential people that he's known. And there's all sorts of snippets in that, and I almost use it like a guidebook sometimes. And it does really spur me on. And I think there's one particular phrase that I like everybody to kind of bear in mind as they go through life. And it can be particularly the case when you're in the world of business, right? And there's always somebody that seems to be outperforming you, or somebody that you're aspiring to be, and they're sort of putting about. And so the phrase is this: it says, "Don't waste your time on jealousy. Sometimes you're ahead, sometimes you're behind, but the race is long, and ultimately it's only with yourself." So I always thought that was great. There's many other. There's also a phrase in there that says, "Be careful whose advice you buy, because it's a form of nostalgia." Taking something out of the disposal, wiping it off, and reusing it for more than it's worth. So you can apply that methodology to me if you want, but yeah. So I think that probably has had a massive influence on the trajectory my life has taken. I'm slightly
that is great.
Slightly not.
No, you got to own it. You certainly got to own it there. That is incredible. I'm gonna have to look that up after we wrap this up. But again, Will, certainly appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I've got a long and complicated French name, so hard to type in, but then easy to hard to miss as well. So it's William Cowell de Gruchy, Cowell space DE space GRUCHY, bane of my life. And we're infogrid.io, so just infogrid.io, where you can find all sorts of really interesting information about what we do, but sort of general market analysis and thought leadership as well. So even if you're not interested in what we do specifically, you can go there to find out how the market is sort of evolving. So yeah, very, very happy to speak to you, and we've got a big team across the globe who'd be happy to welcome you as well.
Well, certainly appreciate the time, Will, and look forward to staying in touch.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Griffin. Really appreciate it, and thanks to everyone listening.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast. Make sure to subscribe for future episodes and visit our website, stratumcommunity.com, for more facilities management content.